Growing up in the 1950s meant living through an era unlike any other, one whose memories remain remarkably vivid even now. Only those who actually lived through that decade can fully appreciate the depth and texture of what it felt like. From the distant chime of an ice cream truck drifting through a warm summer afternoon to the boundless freedom of outdoor play, the 50s were a time that left an indelible mark on everyone who experienced them. Dressed to impress every single day. In the 1950s, whether you were a toddler just starting to walk or a fully grown adult, leaving the house looking anything less than neat and well put together simply wasn't done. It was an unspoken agreement that society held firmly. Men would step out wearing ties and hats, projecting an air of solemnity and courtesy in every situation. Women moved through the world in graceful dresses, always polished and composed. Nobody dashed off to the grocery store in pajamas or shuffled out in worn-out slippers the way people commonly do today. Even children were outfitted deliberately, school clothes for school, their Sunday best for church, and something tidy yet comfortable for playing outside. Boys' shirts were invariably tucked in. People certainly had casual clothes, but whenever they walked out the front door, the expectation was always to look their best. It was a matter of personal pride and communal respect. Families gathered around the big radio. Picture a quiet evening before the television had firmly taken hold of the living room. Families would gather around the large console radio, a piece of furniture that held a place of honor in the house, to share in the entertainment of the day. Children would settle in eagerly each evening to follow the latest episodes of wildly popular programs like The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, The Lone Ranger, and The Adventures of Superman. These radio dramas didn't just deliver laughter and excitement, they also sowed the seeds for a new entertainment industry, as many of them were later adapted into television series. The radio's sound was a unifying thread running through family life, a shared experience where imagination filled in everything the eye couldn't see, shaping how families entertained themselves for decades to come. The first television set on the block. When the television arrived, it felt like a miracle. A window to the wider world had been opened right inside the living room. If your family was among the fortunate few to own one in the 1950s, chances were good that you were the very first on your street to have one. The screens were small, and every image came in shades of black and white. But for the children who watched them, these boxes were nothing short of magical. Television channels even had a formal sign-off at the end of each broadcast night, with some stations playing the Star-Spangled Banner before going dark. It was a nightly ritual, something children of later generations would find nearly impossible to picture. Politeness and respect learned from the very beginning. Many parents of the 1950s had married young, often fresh out of high school at around 18 years old. Despite their youth, they were remarkably firm when it came to raising their children. Good manners and courteous behavior were instilled from the earliest possible age, and respect for elders was treated as the most fundamental virtue a child could hold. Proper etiquette was woven into daily life, answering adults with "yes, ma'am" or "no, sir," making eye contact when speaking or being spoken to, and asking to be excused from the dinner table before getting up. This was long before the era of cell phones and social media, when direct, unhurried human interaction was simply the way things worked. Courtesy and respect were the moral and cultural norms of social life in that time-dot Sunday morning church rush. As the country swelled with the post-war generation of babies, so too did the crowds filling the pews. The 1950s saw record numbers of churchgoers as families across the nation made faith a central pillar of their lives. Church was far more than a place of worship. It was a community hub where neighbors met, connections were forged, and shared values were reinforced week after week. For many children growing up then, attending services became a fixed rhythm of life. Every Sunday morning, every Wednesday evening, and the occasional church potluck that brought the whole congregation together around a shared table. Rock and roll shakes the suburbs. Parents in the 1950s were genuinely alarmed by the music their teenagers were gravitating toward. The hip-shaking energy of Elvis Presley and Chuck Berry riding the crest of a rock and roll wave was seen as far too provocative, a source of moral alarm spreading across suburban households. The big band era had run its course, giving way to something rawer and more electric. Radio stations began spinning what some alarmed conservatives openly called devil's music. But teenagers couldn't get enough of it. Parents tried every conceivable measure to keep their children away from this new sound, from banning it at home to denouncing it publicly. Yet what they dismissed as a passing phase grew into something far more lasting. Rock and roll became a declaration of generational independence, a permanent mark burned into the cultural fabric of the era. Board game nights with the whole family. On evenings indoors, children kept themselves busy in ways that had nothing to do with screens or devices. Instead, they would drag out beloved board games, Monopoly, Mousetrap, The Game of Life, and settle in for a night of genuine family entertainment. Many households made this a weekly tradition, setting aside one evening specifically for playing together. And the price of admission was remarkably modest. A Parker Brothers or Milton Bradley game could be had for less than $2. Beyond the fun, these evenings sparked real conversations and filled rooms with genuine laughter in a way that few things could match. Free play outdoors, driven entirely by imagination. When the weather allowed and the door swung open, the children of the 1950s invented their own amusements from scratch. Organized youth sports were not yet the fixture they would later become, so kids had to work out the rules themselves, deciding what to play, where to do it, and who would be on which team. Captains were chosen, sides were picked, and the game began entirely on the children's own terms. There were no hovering adults micromanaging the experience. Winning mattered far less than having fun and building friendships. The idea of receiving a participation trophy for simply showing up would have struck everyone as absurd. Childhood back then was defined by freedom, spontaneous creativity, and the bonds forged through unscripted play. The Howdy Doody Show. For any family lucky enough to own a television in the 1950s, one program almost every child watched was The Howdy Doody Show. This NBC production stood as a genuine pioneer in children's entertainment, weaving together puppet characters and real human performers like Buffalo Bob Smith and Clarabelle the Clown into something unlike anything young audiences had seen before. The show featured a special section called the Peanut Gallery, rows of children seated in the studio watching the action live, and when the familiar theme music played and the words, "It's Howdy Doody time," rang out, every kid in the living room came running. Howdy Doody's face appeared on merchandise of every kind and in commercials for the show's sponsors, making him a small screen idol and a defining presence in an entire generation's childhood. Walt Disney's Wonderful World. Wednesday evenings held a particular kind of magic for television audiences. The anthology series, known in the 1950s as Walt Disney's Disneyland, which would later become The Wonderful World of Disney, gave families precious few viewing options, but the weekly program, hosted by Walt Disney himself, was enough to draw everyone to the set. Beloved characters like Davy Crockett and Johnny Tremaine came to life in stories that often unfolded across several weeks, giving children something to talk about and share with friends at school. The coonskin cap craze that swept the country was a direct product of those weekly Disney broadcasts, proof of just how deeply the show had taken hold of the national imagination. Family road trips on the brand new interstates. Before air travel became the standard way to vacation, families loaded up the car and hit the open road. The interstate highway system, which began taking shape in the 1950s, made cross-country travel genuinely feasible for the first time, and gas stations, diners, and motels sprang up along the most traveled routes to meet the demand. Chains like Holiday Inn, Howard Johnson's, and Stuckey's became familiar landmarks as families made their way south to Florida or struck out in any direction the road allowed. Packing the car the night before was its own kind of ritual, and the anticipation that built over days on the road produced the sort of memories many people still carry with them and wish they could live again. Milk delivered right to your doorstep. It may be hard to believe now, but fresh milk once arrived at your door without you having to do a thing. The milkman might have made his rounds with a horse and cart, and you could hear the soft clip-clop of hooves and the musical clinking of glass bottles on neighboring stoops as he moved down the street. On especially good mornings, chocolate milk might appear as a small, unexpected treat. Home delivery of milk grew into a widespread and deeply familiar part of daily life, bringing fresh flavor to the doorstep every morning with a consistency that felt entirely natural at the time. The Fluffernutter Sandwich. A staple of lunchboxes and kitchen tables alike, the Fluffernutter sandwich held a special place in the hearts of children everywhere. The recipe was beautifully simple. 2 slices of soft white bread, a generous spread of peanut butter on one side, and a smooth, sweet layer of marshmallow fluff on the other. Sometimes, a fresh slice of banana was added for good measure. It was the taste of childhood distilled into something you could hold in both hands, satisfying, sweet, and carrying the kind of straightforward pleasure that simple food sometimes delivers better than anything elaborate ever could. Sunday nights with Ed Sullivan. Every Sunday evening, the living room took on a particular atmosphere. Families would settle onto the sofa in front of the black and white television and give themselves over to an hour of the Ed Sullivan Show. Alongside I Love Lucy, the Howdy Doody Show, and Gunsmoke, it ranked among the most watched programs of the era. The lineup changed every week. Music, comedy, circus acts, and artistic performances all shared the same stage, and millions of viewers tuned in faithfully from one end of the country to the other. Television on weekend evenings became the great gathering ritual of the age, drawing families together for shared laughter and the collective pleasure of watching something extraordinary. The drive-in movie theater. Among the great pleasures of warm weather evenings, the drive-in movie theater stood in a class of its own. Families would pull in, find a good spot, hang the small speaker on the car window or tune the radio to the film's audio, and settle in for a feature under the open sky. It offered a comfort and intimacy that an indoor cinema simply couldn't replicate. The whole experience had the feel of something special, a warm summer night, the flicker of the screen, the quiet hum of the car, and everyone together without having to go anywhere at all. The Good Humor Ice Cream Truck. Another sound that defined summer was the chime of the Good Humor ice cream truck making its way through the neighborhood. To children listening for it, that bell was nothing less than a magical signal. The moment it was heard, kids would sprint home, ask their mothers for a few coins, and rush back outside to flag down the truck before it rolled past. Popsicles were selected with great deliberation, and the pleasure of that cold, sweet treat on a hot afternoon was total. The ice cream truck and its chimes were more than just a vendor passing through. They were the sound of summer itself, a recurring moment of pure childhood joy. Candy for a penny. The candy counter of the 1950s was a world unto itself. Charleston Chews, Bazooka Gum, Necco Wafers, Bonomo Turkish Taffy, Atomic Fireballs, Root Beer Barrels, and Candy Buttons were names that shaped the early years of countless children, and most of them cost no more than a single penny. Pretending to smoke a candy cigarette or carefully peeling dots off a strip of paper were small rituals of play and imagination. These treats weren't just snacks, they were props in the theater of childhood, tiny pleasures that carried a sweetness far beyond their flavor. Saddle shoes and poodle skirts. In the world of 1950s fashion, the black and white saddle shoe was as close to universal as clothing could get. You kept them polished until you could see your reflection looking back at you. They paired perfectly with poodle skirts, wide, colorful, flared skirts that typically fell to the knee or just below, made of felt and decorated with an elaborately stitched poodle design that gave them their name. Together, saddle shoes and poodle skirts captured everything that defined the young people of the era: energy, vibrancy, and a distinctive sense of style that belonged entirely to that moment in time. Soda fountains and jukeboxes. The soda fountain was the social gathering place of choice, the spot where friends met after school, where dates unfolded on Friday evenings, and where the afternoon could stretch pleasantly in any direction. These bar-style establishments served carbonated drinks and ice cream in every combination imaginable, producing sundaes and milkshakes of remarkable variety. And in the corner, almost always, stood a jukebox. Drop in a coin, make your selection, and the room filled with music. The dance floor, if there was one, wouldn't stay empty for long. Soda fountains and jukeboxes together became a symbol of youth culture, places where friendships deepened, where music connected people, and where memories accumulated without anyone trying to make them. Sock hops. High school dances in the 1950s had one distinctive feature that set them apart. Students removed their shoes before stepping onto the gymnasium floor, dancing in their socks to protect the hardwood beneath. From that habit, the nickname sock hop was born. At these dances, young people threw themselves into newly popular styles of movement: the hand jive, the stroll, the box step, and above all, the twist. Each of these dances was an expression of something larger, the freedom and exuberance of a generation finding its own voice, its own rhythm, and its own way of moving through the world. Rotary dial phones and party lines. The telephone most families relied on in the 1950s was the rotary dial model, a heavy, solid device that you dialed one number at a time, the wheel spinning back between each digit. Most households had just the one phone, and in many cases, it ran on a party line shared with neighbors. Different families had different numbers, but if you picked up the receiver and someone else was already talking, you simply waited your turn. To find a number you didn't already know, you reached for the thick phone directory and flipped through its pages until you found the listing you needed. Mimeograph machines and their unmistakable smell. In schools throughout the 1950s, the mimeograph machine was the technology that produced copies of assignments, announcements, and classroom materials. It worked through a process that left every page printed in a distinctive shade of purple ink and carrying a sharp chemical scent that was unlike anything else. Children would press the freshly printed page to their faces and inhale deeply, not because anyone told them to, but because the smell was simply part of the experience. For an entire generation, that scent became permanently linked to the smell of school itself, of lessons learned, notebooks filled, and ordinary days that would only become precious in retrospect. Christmas trees draped in tinsel. Decorating the Christmas tree in the 1950s was a production carried out with great care and considerable patience. Thin, shimmering strands of tinsel were laid over each branch one by one until the whole tree caught and scattered the light in every direction. A toy train making its way around the base, small wooden sleds tucked among the wrapped gifts, these were the images of Christmas that could, even now, transport you instantly back to the warmth and excitement of those holiday evenings. Children worked alongside parents to build that atmosphere together, turning the living room into something genuinely enchanted for a few weeks each year. Radio flyer wagons and metal roller skates. Two pieces of equipment defined outdoor childhood mobility in the 1950s. The radio flyer wagon, bright red, sturdy, unmistakable, served as a utility vehicle for the neighborhood, hauling empty bottles to the store for the deposit, delivering newspapers, or simply giving a friend a ride down the block. And a pair of metal roller skates with a key to adjust the fit to your shoe was the other essential. You could almost identify the skaters by sight, because they were the kids with scraped knees showing up to church on Sundays, fresh evidence of the week's adventures. Both the wagon and the skates were instruments of endless exploration, carrying children through an active, curious, freely ranging childhood. Downtown closed on Sundays. In small towns and mid-sized cities alike, Sunday had a particular character that no other day shared. Main Street was quiet because the stores were shut. This wasn't a sign of economic trouble. It was a deliberate community rhythm, allowing everyone to attend services, rest, and spend time with family. If you ran out of milk on a Sunday or found yourself needing something urgently, knocking on a neighbor's door to borrow it was entirely normal. Nobody thought twice about asking or being asked. It reflected a pace of life organized around things other than commerce, around faith, rest, and the ties between people who knew and looked after one another. the Fuller Brushman, and the Encyclopedia Britannica salesman. Before online shopping or the big box store had appeared on the horizon, a significant amount of commerce happened at the front door. The Fuller Brushman was a fixture of domestic life, a salesman who came to the house, introduced his line of brushes and cleaning tools to the housewife, and sometimes demonstrated their effectiveness right there on the spot. Another figure who appeared regularly at doorsteps was the Encyclopedia Britannica salesman. These comprehensive reference sets were expensive, and most families who bought them did so through small monthly installments spread over time. Both of these door-to-door professionals represented a way of shopping that was personal, unhurried, and deeply woven into the domestic fabric of the era. Westerns on television. For boys growing up in the 1950s, the Western was king. Programs like The Lone Ranger, The Roy Rogers Show, and Gunsmoke filled the television schedule and the imagination in equal measure. After watching their favorite cowboy heroes in action, kids would head outside wearing toy holsters with cap guns, acting out scenes of pursuit and adventure in the backyard or down the street. Playing cowboys and Indians, cops and robbers, or frontier scouts was how the stories continued once the set was switched off. And if the cowboy craze didn't grip them, they were probably wearing a coonskin cap and following every episode of Davy Crockett with unbroken devotion. The Mickey Mouse Club. When the Mickey Mouse Club debuted on ABC in 1955, it became something close to a national institution almost immediately. Broadcast on weekday afternoons, this hour-long variety program featured a cast of talented child performers known as Mouseketeers. Among them, Annette Funicello, Bobby Burgess, and Cubby O'Brien, who sang, danced, and acted their way into the hearts of millions of American children. The show was more than entertainment. It was a shared cultural experience that gave young viewers something to talk about, look forward to, and belong to. For many of the performers themselves, it marked the very beginning of careers that would last far into adulthood. The polio vaccine and the end of a long fear. The approval and mass distribution of the polio vaccine in 1955 stands as one of the most consequential events of the entire decade. With polio disabling close to 35,000 children every year, the fear surrounding public gatherings, especially during the summer months, had been genuine and widespread. The vaccine swept that fear away. Parents who had quietly dreaded the arrival of warm weather could now let their children run freely again. In smaller towns, physicians still made house calls during this period, attending to patients in their homes with a personal attentiveness that spoke to a different relationship between medicine and community than what would follow in later decades. Transistor radios, music you could carry anywhere. The transistor radio was the device every kid in the 1950s wanted, and a great many of them managed to get one. Small enough to carry in a pocket or prop on a windowsill, these portable sets transformed the way music was consumed. With rock and roll growing louder and more insistent by the month, the transistor radio put that music within reach everywhere, in teenagers' bedrooms, at the barber shop, on the beach, at a picnic. It wasn't just a gadget, it was a statement about freedom, a declaration that music now belonged to you wherever you happened to be. Learning to tie your shoes. Before Velcro simplified everything, tying shoelaces was a genuine childhood milestone, a skill that had to be mastered before starting elementary school and that carried real weight as a marker of growing up. Buckles were also common, but the bow was the standard, and every child eventually spent long minutes sitting on the porch steps or the bedroom floor, small fingers fumbling with laces that never seemed to cooperate. There were moments of frustration, moments when it felt impossible. But with patient guidance from a parent or an older sibling, and with enough repetition, the skill eventually settled into the hands and became second nature. It was one of the first things a child truly learned to do for themselves. Wide bench seats in enormous cars. The automobiles of the 1950s were built on a generous scale, and nothing reflected that more than the bench seat, a single, continuous seat running the full width of the car's interior, offering room to spread out, slide around, or stretch out across the back if the journey ran long. Seatbelts were not yet a standard feature of the driving experience. Car culture had taken firm hold of American life by this point, shaping social and leisure habits in ways that ran deep. Drive-in burger stands let you order and eat without leaving the vehicle. Drive-in theaters let you watch a feature film under the stars from the comfort of your own seat. The automobile had become not just transportation, but a social environment, a space where American life played out in new ways. Gas at 13 cents a gallon. It strains belief now, but there was a time when filling up your tank cost about 13 cents per gallon. Even more striking is the experience that went with it. You didn't pump your own gas. A station attendant came out to greet you, took care of the pump himself, perhaps wiped the windshield while he was at it, and sent you on your way with a cheerful word. It was a full-service transaction in the most literal sense, personal, unhurried, and entirely ordinary by the standards of the day. That combination of cheap fuel and attentive service made the open road genuinely accessible, fueling the road trip culture and the long family journeys that produced some of the era's most treasured memories. Zip the monkey. Among the stuffed animals that found their way into children's arms and onto bedroom shelves, Zip the monkey occupied a particularly beloved spot. Made of soft plush with characteristic rubber features, face, ears, and hands all molded with careful detail, Zip was always dressed in a bright yellow shirt with his name printed clearly on the front, red plush overalls with straps, a small red hat, and white rubber shoes. The outfit made him instantly recognizable, and his popularity grew substantially after the famous chimpanzee Zippy made appearances on the Howdy Doody Show. The connection to a beloved television personality turned Zip the monkey into something more than a toy. He became a companion, present in bedrooms across the country. Play clothes meant for getting dirty. Children in the 1950s spent their days outside from morning until the first stars appeared, and getting dirty was simply part of the deal. Play clothes were the clothes set aside precisely for this purpose, garments their mothers didn't mind seeing come back grass-stained, muddy, or torn at the knee. They were the perfect uniform for a bike ride through every corner of the neighborhood, for a sprawling game of street baseball in the summer dust, or for whatever climbing, building, or exploring the day happened to produce. Dirty clothes, scraped knees, and wide, dusty smiles, that was the authentic portrait of a 1950s childhood. An era in which children were genuinely free to be children, moving through the world on their own terms. 3-dimensional comic books. On rainy days when going outside wasn't an option, comic books provided a ready escape, and for a brief, exciting period, three-dimensional comic books elevated the experience into something genuinely novel. Favorite heroes and cartoon characters seemed to leap off the page when you held the special glasses that came folded inside each issue. The effect was arresting in a way that flat ink on paper simply couldn't match. The trend burned bright but didn't last long. As the novelty of the technology faded, readers began to notice that many three-dimensional comics leaned heavily on visual spectacle at the expense of storytelling depth. But in the short window when they were at their height of popularity, these comics offered children something new and thrilling, a fresh way of inhabiting the worlds of the characters they loved most.